You know, this has been a great season with Angler on Tour, but one of the most frequently asked questions we've had along the way is, how did you get to where you are today? Next year will be the start of my 19th season, and if you'll stick around, I'll be right back and show you where it all began.
Our next young man is a man from Cincinnati, Ohio, fishing with us for about 4 or 5 years. Nice welcome for Joe Thomas, Cincinnati, Ohio.
My first introduction into bass fishing came from a farm pond. And you know, if you're a kid growing up in the Midwest like I was, you know, that's the most accessible water to fish. It's like farm ponds are just dotting, you know, the landscape everywhere around southern Ohio. And I had permission to get into a small pond near the house, and I was fishing with a school friend of mine, and we were over there, and I caught a 5-pound bass. I'll never forget. I caught it on a live night crawler on an old True Temper push-button reel. It was just a real old reel. It's a wonder it even was able to reel the fish in. But I can remember dragging that fish down the country road, that 5-pound bass down the country road, and people pulling over, you know, and they were all excited because I had this big fish, and I just thought, man, that is so cool, you know. I never had them do that over a pike before, you know, and it was just a neat deal. And I kind of evolved into the bass fishing and the excitement from that, and then came the lures and you know, there's just a lot to bass fishing that a lot of other types of fishing didn't have, and I really like that. You know, I guess my first introduction into competitive fishing came through an acquaintance, a guy who's actually become my lifelong friend. His name's Pat Hailstones, and he was a young guy. I was 16 years old, not even quite able to drive. I was actually about 15 and a half, and he was about 19 or 20 years old, and just an avid fisherman. And he and I hooked up, and he was in a bass club. The bass club was what intrigued me the most, was the fact that he had these trophies, man. I mean, he had trophies from catching fish, and I thought that was so cool. And I just had to get in this bass club, and I'm 16 years old, and I'm just dying to get in this bass club, but you had to be 18.
There was a lot of older members in the club who fished fairly relaxed. One fish was a good day, but the meeting, you had to be voted in to be permitted to fish in the Kingfishers. They had maybe 20 members at the time, and Joe was 16 years old. You had to be 18 by the bylaws. The problem was, we knew, his dad and I, and one of the other members in the club, how good a fisherman and how possessed he was with fishing. And we were convincing the other members to give him a chance. Some of the guys were afraid that he'd get cold if it was too early.
We got there to the meeting, and I was introduced to all the guys, and they were handing out the trophy from their last event. And it was just a really cool deal, and I was in love with it from the beginning.
So we had to vote, and the vote was like 17-3. The first tournament Joe fished in, I think he come in second place. The guy who fished with him was 62 years old, wanted to have lunch, and spread out a picnic basket in the back of the boat. Joe pays no attention. He's rushing to another spot, hammers down, and some of the guys' food flew in the lake, so he quit the club. But within a year, everybody knew Joe doesn't get too cold. He doesn't get tired. He's there from the first thing in the morning, and he's making a cast with 2 minutes to go before weigh-in.
And that was kind of, you know, my first introduction to being a group and to be a part of anything competitive. The neat part about it was that it was like putting a fish in water, literally, no pun intended. You know, I won the club championship the second year I was in it at age 17.
But if you'll remember how you won that year-end championship, the guy that I was fishing with had gone ahead of you, and he'd caught, we were in Dale Hall, and he'd caught a large smallmouth, and you wanted to see it, and he opened the live well to let you see the fish, and the fish dived out of the live well into the lake, and he actually laid his head on my shoulder. I thought he was going to cry. And the season went down the tube for him and give it to you.
Stay tuned for more tips and tricks when Angler on.
Gary Klein was one of my biggest my biggest mentors. I looked at Gary Klein, 18 years old, out of California, and he came right out there and started winning on a Bassmaster tournament trail, and he's immediately famous. And I thought, you know, what a cool way to make a living. Just now, you know, the sport was just then starting to get, you know, a lot of money involved, you know, and I took a year off of college. I went to my parents and I said, you know, I want 1 year. Just give me 1 year to try it. You know, I want to spend 1 year on the circuit, and I could see if I could make it. And you know, my dad, he kind of clutched his chest a little, like, oh, here we go. And my mom, she was, you know, kind of apprehensive. But they were totally behind me, which is pretty amazing, you know, the fact that they were going to give me that year to do what I wanted to do. And I literally, you know, went out there on a shoestring, and my mom and dad were my bank for a while. You know, when I would dip into my savings to a point where there were no savings left, and then they would loan me the money to fish the tournaments until I would win a little and pay them back, and there was a lot of that going on. And my dad kept trying to emphasize the whole time, it's a 3-year curve. Any new business, it's going to take you about 3 years to be competitive. Well, you know, I'm 20 years old, and I'm young, hotshot Ohio, you know, fisherman, you know, and I thought, I can win out there immediately. And Dad was right. It took about 3 years before I was competitive. But I did, you know, win some paychecks along the way. I won a boat my second year out there, and you know, I would always win enough. It was just like I was being provided for. I'd always win enough to get to the next tournament, or to pay that boat payment, or pay the insurance. And you know, at that time there were no sponsors. You know, it was just about getting to the next tournament and winning. And I can remember thinking, you know, man, if I just had enough money to pay my truck payment, my boat payment, my insurance, and to be able to travel from one tournament to another, I don't need anything else in life. And, you know, after a while, I kind of came to the cold realization that tournament winnings weren't going to make a very good living out on the tournament trail. There was something that these other guys had, the top level guys, that I didn't, and that was sponsorship. My first break probably came when I qualified for the Redman All-American. And at the time, it was the largest cash payout in fishing. It was $100,000. And I remember I made it through the local level. I qualified for the regional, and then I went to Kentucky Lake and fished the regional, and then qualified for the All-American. And I had no idea what I'd gotten into. I just knew it was a big deal. There was only 25 guys going to fish this All-American for $100,000. It was a pretty cool opportunity. So we go to Florida, and there's all of these sponsor guys there, these people that are giving us stuff, jackets and shirts and hats, and there's, you know, dinners and corporate things happening. It was my first little peek into the corporate world. You know, and about that time when this was just all starting to happen, I was pretty shy. I wasn't really one of those guys that would walk up and introduce myself and try and make a contact. And I'm at the Cincinnati Sports Show working for my local skeeter dealer, and I meet this guy from California. He was like the hottest thing in fishing at the time. He just won this big prize. He'd won the U.S. Open, and yeah, $50,000 prize, and I was just in all of this. And he's a young guy, good-looking dude, and he's up there doing seminars, getting paid to do these seminars. And you know, it took all the energy I could muster, but I went up and I introduced myself to him, and his name was Rich Tauber. He's from Woodland Hills, California, still one of the icons of the sport, you know, big name out west. He taught me what it was about to pursue the sponsors, how to go about it, you know, and how to sell myself. You know, I was a commodity that I had to sell, and I didn't realize that. From my standpoint, Rich needed me because he was desperately seeking an avenue to come back to the east and fish. And I was able to kind of help get him to the east, and we actually ran a double-decker trailer for a while. We were kind of famous for that. We had the two Skeeter boats, one on top of the other. He was sponsored by Skeeter also. And we traveled the country for about 6 or 7 years, and we roomed together, and we worked sponsors together, and we did promotions together, we fished tournaments together. And along the way, you know, Rich had a couple of classic qualifications, as did I, and we just kind of worked our way up the ladder together. But if I had to have one person that I had to say influenced me the most and really helped me to develop that intuition as to how to attain a sponsor, it was definitely Rich. He's the best in the business.
Don't go away. Angler on Tour will be right back.
You know, probably the biggest issue with this job, with being a pro bass angler, is the travel. I think the average person doesn't have any clue the amount of days on the road and the amount of travel. You know, you see us getting to fish all the cool lakes, and you see the guys winning money and the prizes and all that stuff, but you don't see the days that you spend in your van or in your pickup truck. In the old days, I towed with a van, and you know, I would just go from one tournament to the next, and I would stay with buddies. That anybody that lived in that area, I'd bunk in with them to save money, you know, and I was single, and you know, life was just a kick, you know. I'm fishing for a living, having a great time, and the travel wasn't such a big issue. But, you know, in 1989, I met my wife, and then a couple of years later, you know, we started having children.
When Joe and I first met, we traveled a lot together, and I traveled with him exclusively. I stopped doing what I was doing, and I just went on the road with him. And I learned a lot about the bass fishing industry that way, and I think because I traveled with him so much, it gave me a real perspective on what he has to deal with day in and day out. I got a first-hand experience with that from getting up fishing with him, and just the casting, the constant casting, and being exposed to the elements. When we came home, and we come in at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night, all I wanted to do was get in bed and go to sleep. And I think from that point of perspective, when you're a wife and your husband comes home from work and you've worked as hard as he has, you have a more understanding about, you know, what the whole industry is about and what it takes to be a bass fisherman. Well, we traveled for several years together, and then we had our first son, Ryan, and that changed everything for us, because now you have to deal with stopping and feeding a child, and you can't just go for 20 hours in the car and not stop. Living on the road is kind of like being a gypsy. You're from hotel to hotel, living in cars and suitcases, and I wanted more than that. I didn't want my children living out of suitcases, and I wanted them to have a sense of community, and for me, I needed a sense of home too. And if you're always on the road, you come home, you're coming home from the tournament, and there's this letdown, like, okay, you've just left all the people that is your family on the road, and what are you coming home to? Well, there's not a lot to come home to because you've been gone. Nobody's waiting. Your friends aren't waiting for you because they think you're gone.
For us, we found that keeping the family together at home and Dad out doing his job is the best. But again, that's probably my most difficult thing to deal with, is time away from the family, because I like spending time with them. You know, we get to have a lot of fun when I'm home, and I just wish I had more of that type of time.
Sometimes it's difficult when my dad's not home and when he's gone, but really what I do to pass the time is call him on his cell phone or talk to him, or really sometimes I'll go on the internet and look at the standings and see if he's doing well. If he's doing well, that also makes me a little happier. And but what I do to pass the time, sometimes I go out and fish and think about that he's out there fishing on the water somewhere too.
When we come together, because we have the same goals and perspective and insight on what we want out of life, I think everybody's happy, and it just makes it flow so much better, having been on the road with him and knowing what it's like to be there.
Don't go away. Angler on Tour. We'll be right back.
Probably the high point of my career to date was in the early 90s when I won the Redman All-American.
You know, it's been said a few times, bass fishing is a sport where the American dream still exists. I want everybody out there to watch this on TV and in here tonight know it exists. Here it is, right here. Thank you.
You know, I'm a firm believer that in this game, just like any other sport, that success feeds success. The year that I won the All-American, I also had my biggest earnings in Bassmaster. I made the Classic. I did well in the Classic. It was like a snowball, and it was on its way to the top, you know. And during that period of time is probably when I got my biggest foothold in the fishing industry and with the sponsors. You know, it was like all of a sudden, Joe Thomas is for real, you know. I mean, he's a winner. He's making the Classic. He's a solid competitor. He can do the things that we need him to do. And there was a lot of money put behind me at that time. And most of those sponsors I still have today. I have long-standing, long-lasting relationships with most of the companies. I've been very apprehensive about moving around, you know, from company to company. But, you know, also with that success comes a lot of, you know, you know, a lot of frustration. At that point in my career, I literally thought that the sky was the limit. I thought I was the next Roland Martin or Kevin Van Dam, and I believed that in my heart. And, you know, I think at times I even pressed a little too hard to attain that goal, and along with that came a lot of frustrations. You know, the frustrations of near misses. Probably one of the biggest disappointments throughout my tournament career is the Bassmasters Classic. I have been so close so many times. I've been the first guy out of the Classic 4 or 5 times, and I can't even tell you. I can't even describe the disappointment when you fish all year. You work all year diligently, every day, with one goal in mind, and to fall this far short. And there was a year when it was pounds and ounces. It wasn't points. I missed it by 9 ounces. Over the whole course of the year, 9 ounces. And you rehash every 1.5 pound fish to 7-pound fish that got off during the season. You know, you rehash all that in your mind, and you just, you know, you relive it, and it eats at you, and you can't sleep. You know, it's just it's a difficult thing to deal with. And I think that this sport teaches you humility like no other. I really believe that. You know, one thing that I always said when I began my career, though, is I wanted to be attainable, no matter what, whether it was a kid when you walked by, if he wanted to talk to you, you wanted an autograph, or whether it was, you know, a group of people that were, you know, you needed to see. You treat everybody, whether it's a guy at the gas station or whether it's a corporate sponsor, you treat everybody the same. And I think that's important, you know. I'm from the old school, you know, my parents raised me that way, you know, you treat people the way you would want to be treated. And I think that that's come back to really help me in my career.
You know, fishing is really no different than any other sport. Anytime you interject a bunch of guys that are proud of the way they fish and are fierce competitors, you know, being able to separate your on-the-water issues and not take them off the water is difficult to do sometimes. And that's something that's impressed me about Joe. He's been able to separate that. You know, he knows how to put on his game face when it comes time to do your business at hand fishing. But when he comes off the water, he's very approachable, and I think that's something, you know, that I gravitated to because personally he's an enjoyable person to be around. But I think that's also contributed to his success off the water, his relationships with his sponsors and so forth. And I think, you know, by positioning himself that way, you know, it's really a nice complete package as far as, you know, Joe's personality.
You know, everybody wants to dial in on like one issue or one thing that has allowed me to stay out here for 19 years and compete. You know, I think God's watched over me. You know, I've had a lot of things happen at a certain time. You know, I'd be just out of money, and I'd make a big check in a tournament, or I was just, you know, ready to hang it up at one time or another, and you know, catch enough fish to get me to the next tournament. There's just been a lot of good things that have happened to me when it needed to happen. But I've also made a lot of my own luck. You know, I have to believe that focus is very important in this sport and organization. I'm an organization freak, whether it's my truck or my boat or my business plans. I try and stay organized and have a long-term goal in mind, and I think that's been pretty critical for me also. You know, over the course of my career, I've had the opportunity to watch the sport evolve. I mean, literally watch it evolve in nearly 20 years of fishing on the trail. And probably the biggest thing that I've seen happen is the fact that corporate America is now aware that bass fishing exists. So you're starting to see large companies participate in this sport and see that it's not just a niche market. It's like the #1 pastime in America is fishing. And the other thing that's happened too is you've seen 2 major organizations evolve and actually bump heads a little bit. And that competition between the FLW Tour and the Bassmaster Tournament Trail has caused the purses to continue to elevate and the stakes to continue to rise and the television coverage to get better, and just a lot of good things are happening. I see the sport in a blossoming mode. I see this sport where NASCAR was 15 years ago. You know, the 2003 Tour is going to really put a lot of stress on the fishermen. It's going to take us from Lake Toho in Florida in January, all the way to the California Delta and back to Lake Hamilton in Arkansas. In 4.5 short months, we're going to fish 10 events and travel over 50,000 miles. So it's going to be a very, very taxing circuit, and it's going to be one that is really demanding for every angler involved.
And there's the final two. Joe Thomas from Mainville, Ohio, out of Cincinnati. 6 pounds, 11 ounces for Joe Thomas, the new Redman All-American champion.
I don't think my best days have come yet. I really don't. If I thought my best days were done, I'd probably do something else. But, you know, I think that my best is yet to come. I hope you missed the Bassmasters Classic. A major goal was achieved in qualifying for the 2003 Bassmaster Tour, which is slated to be bigger and better than ever. So make sure you follow us next year in 2003 for Angler on Tour.